Hello, my name is Kirsty, and welcome to Upside Down Books.
Non più tra I farfalloni amoroso.
Right, today, following on from my previous video, which, well, if you've seen it, I'm finally going to be telling you what my top 10 favourite sci-fi books are. So let's get to it. I'm not going to include any of my Doctor Who books on this list just because... Actually, no, I tell a lie. I'm going to give you one honourable mention just before we start. Two! I tell a lie, I'm going to give you two. As you know, I like Doctor Who. I have two Doctor Who books to quickly mention within the sci-fi bracket, which are not in my top 10, but if you like reading Doctor Who books, please read these ones, they're very good. So the first one is The Stone Rose by Jacqueline Rayner. Jacqueline Rayner is really good. I really like all of... Backtrack slightly. All the Doctor Who books are written by different authors, so you kind of have a pool of authors that they get to write different stories. Jacqueline Rayner is really good. This one follows Tennant and Rose, and yes, this is a spoiler sort of, but this has the kiss you've always wanted between those two in this book. That's all I'm going to say for it. It wins. The second one is Touched by an Angel by Jonathan Morris. This one obviously is the next Doctor, so Matt Smith with Amy and Rory, and follows around the Weeping Angels. This one's really good because it's sad. Is that a good reason for something to be good? But it is, let's just say Rory gets touched by an angel. And whilst it is nothing like that final episode for that series, which we won't mention because it's far too upsetting, it does have similar sort of tones, and it's just good, okay? So if you're going to read any Doctor Who books, read those two. Moving on. So I have 10 books for you today that I've compiled as a list of both my favourite sci-fi books and books that I'd recommend reading if you haven't, or if you are trying to dive into the genre. One thing that I have noticed making this list is that I don't seem to have actually read a lot of sci-fi books. Apart from the enormous collection of Doctor Who books I have, it actually took me a little bit of time to procure 10 sci-fi books. What I did notice is I actually have a lot of sci-fi books on my shelf that I haven't read those, so we are going to go through those right now, but I do think this might change quite dramatically in the future just because I really haven't read that many sci-fi books. Right, so I have actually just sat down and worked out from 1 to 10 my favourite to least favourite of my favourites. So, coming in at number 10 is From a Distant Star by Karen McQuestion. This book was really good. I read this one for review a couple of years ago, and I constantly keep throwing it at everyone's faces because I think you should all watch it. It's really, really good. This one is about a world where the main character's boyfriend is in a coma and dying from cancer. Pretty sad start to the story. However, an alien spaceship crash lands on Earth and one of them survives, and in order to continue surviving, possesses her boyfriend. And when he suddenly wakes up and gets better, everyone's like, oh, it's a miracle, praise the Lord. But the main character is like, this isn't my boyfriend, there's something different. And it's really funny, but it's really good because the story ends up being her trying to help the alien get back to his planet, and therefore get her boyfriend back as well. So it's a really, really good story, super enjoyable. It's within the YA category, very easy to read, so if you're looking to branch into this genre and start with something more approachable, this one reads more like a contemporary than a sci-fi, so I definitely recommend it if that's more your type of genre. Coming in at number 9, I have Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. I haven't finished this series, but I enjoyed this an enormous amount. I would say this is more of a paranormal thriller sort of sci-fi book, but it's very interesting. It's not one to read at night time. There are pictures throughout. This one's not particularly scary, but they are dark and they are real pictures that Ransom Riggs has found and put into the book. So when you're just kind of flipping along and you get to a particularly creepy one at 11 PM and then don't sleep for the next 3 nights, it's great. All of those books I had stacked to me just fell onto my back as I said that, and I had a mini heart attack. Oh, I thought it was the ghost of Christmas past coming to kill me. I would recommend this one for people who enjoy thrillers. It's not horror, it's definitely... That is an enormous butterfly. But yeah, if you don't really like the creepy sort of things, then this probably... I wouldn't bother. It's a really cool category of sci-fi that I'd like to explore more, in the hope that I don't scare myself permanently. The next book I have to show you is The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. I do not like this cover. There is a much nicer cover, which I will also show you here, just so you can appreciate that. But this one is really enjoyable. This is dystopian sci-fi, so it's set in a post-apocalyptic feeling world where a lot of children have died from a disease that suddenly hit, and the ones that survived have come out with superpowers, or supernatural powers, I guess you could say. And the main character has one that's quite desired for what she can do. So it's sort of a story of teenagers trying to work out how to survive in a world where the adults want to keep them basically in prison camps and use the powers for their own good and kind of, you know, dissect them. I feel like if you don't read sci-fi, you might have read dystopian, whether in the fantasy category or within sci-fi without knowing, but dystopian's a fun genre to break into because it just sort of feels like your regular young adult novel, but with added tension and less obtrusively sci-fi elements in it. Following on from the dystopian theme, I of course have Divergent by Veronica Roth on this list. You've probably read it. If you don't know, this is about a character called Triss who has grown up in a post-apocalyptic Chicago, and people are divided into, what are they called? Factions. Things start to go wrong. Triss doesn't really fit in. These factions are basically your personality type, and each faction has a different role to play in keeping society running. It's really good. I can almost promise you that if you like the idea of dystopian novels, do yourself the favour of reading this one, because this one is like the definition of dystopia right there. The next book I have for you is Pawn by Amy Carter. This book is really similar to Red Queen, but quite different because it's sci-fi, not fantasy, and has better villains. I don't want to compare it to Red Queen because I know a lot of people don't like it, so if you liked Red Queen, you're gonna love this. If you didn't like Red Queen, this is possibly the better alternative that you've been looking for. This one, people are ranked by the number that is tattooed, I think, on the back of their neck. So from 1 to 7, and 7 is basically royalty. And the main girl gets selected and genetically altered to imitate the daughter of the royal family as a puppet because the daughter isn't doing what she's supposed to do. It's interesting. It's like someone took the same plotline for the two books and then tried one with fantasy and one with sci-fi, and honestly I do think this is the better version of the story. Red Queen's still, but we're not talking about Red Queen, so we're going to stop talking about that. Recommend this one a lot. Really recommend this one. There's actually really beautiful editions of the covers. They just got recently redone as well, which is even more of a reason to get them. The next book I have for you is Hunger Games. Of course, this was never not going to be on this list. This one is sort of a more complex dystopian sci-fi because instead of it just being a corrupted agency, it's like quite a severely reimagined world. Again, you've probably read it or you've watched the movies or you know it follows Katniss and Peter and Liam Hemsworth, what's his name? Gale. And in it there is an annual competition where children get picked from all of the different districts. There's 1 to 12, 1 being the richest, 12 being like poorest, where Katniss is from, and they fight to the death. If you need an addictive sci-fi book that's just a little bit more sci-fi than Divergent, this is it. The next book I have to show for you is The Gender Game by Bella Forrest. This book is insane. I love it because it's sort of exploring the differences between like biological genders, not gender identity, the sexes, if you will. And it's basically, it's a post-apocalyptic world, and men and women have gone, you were the problem last time, no, you were the problem, so they went, haha, I will make a matriarchy where women will lead and rule and men are basically slaves. And the men went, well, but I will make a patriarchy where men will rule and women are slaves. The plotline of it, though, is the main character who hasn't seen basically any of her family for years. She lives in the matriarchy, she's in prison, and she gets pulled in by the queen to go on a secret mission to get sent over to the patriarchy to do some spying, and oh my god, it's so good because the guy that she gets billeted with is basically a spy for the matriarchy in the patriarchy. My goodness, this is so confusing. The best thing about this book is it's fast-paced, it's really thought-provoking, it's something completely new, but it has at least 3 plot twists in it that you really don't see coming because there's already quite a complex story, and suddenly Bella Forrest is like, oh but surprise, oh but surprise. Point is, excellent sci-fi book, really good example of how the sci-fi genre is used to be extraordinarily thought-provoking because it is in a more realistic setting than something like fantasy. The next book I have for you is 1,000 Pieces of You by Claudia Gray. In my mind, someone says sci-fi and I think of Claudia Gray. This book is your stereotypical sci-fi book. Claudia Gray, apart from being a very talented author, has written us an incredible story which just gets better and better each book. Do you know what? I think the reason I like it the most is because the girl in it is artistically minded, which I definitely am, opposed to her extraordinarily scientifically minded family. Anyway, things happen, an invention called a Firebird is created and stolen, and let's just say a lot of dimensional travel happens. It's so much fun because it's not what Claudia Gray has done, is she's appealed to my Doctor Who heart. she has looked at dimensional travel opposed to time travel. The theory in this book is that every decision made has created a parallel world where things are different. So there's an underwater city, there's a Russian city, there's a, you know, when different powers didn't fall, things like that. All sorts is happening. So this is good. This is a good way of enjoying something that is like quintessentially sci-fi, but having really appealing elements, so that if you're ever getting lost with the sciencey things that are happening, it's not too bad. You're sort of pulled on forwards by being like, wow, what an interesting idea if this hadn't happened in history. So this is, yeah, really topping it high on this list. Moving up to number 8 on my list, I have The Just City by Jo Walton. This is seriously underread. This book a lot of people will define as fantasy, but it is sci-fi. So this book follows the Greek gods Athena and Apollo, who decide on reading Plato's work, who is a Greek philosopher, that they are going to try and create the perfect city, the just city that he describes in his writings. And when they do that, they go, who can we bring into this world, because they can't just magic up people, from what time, what period can we bring them in to live and raise them so that they are like raised with the mindset of how Plato says. It's literally like a huge live experiment to see what would happen if you raise people to the book in someone who is revered in their culture as being like, yes, this is how you make the perfect city. So they take like 10,000 children who were enslaved during, you know, ancient times, etc., bring them there when they're 10 years old, and they raise them. And this series is insane. It's really hard to describe, but it's incredible. It's very philosophical in a way, but not overly so I'm not super philosophically minded, but I didn't have any problems keeping up with it. There are heaps of interesting characters at play. Obviously there's a bit of Greek mythology, but again, the main elements all derive from the sci-fi element, from time travel and experiments and all sorts of things that they're doing, philosophy. Hard to explain. I would just say, please trust my word on this one. Go get yourself a copy and go reading. This is very thought-provoking, very interesting, and it has such a beautiful array of characters. And coming in at number 10, and I realise I said I would start from 10 and go to 1, but 1, the best book on this list, is The Martian by Andy Weir. This book, oh my god! For God's sake, please pick up The Martian, and if you just like sci-fi and you haven't, pick up The Martian, people. Andy Weir has done an insane thing. Did you know he created his own software to work out some of the scientific things that happen in here? Okay, let's start. The plot line is that the main character in this one, Mark, played by Matt Damon in the film, goes on an mission, to Mars, and they're there for a set period of time where they do, you know, collecting of resources and examinations of stuff, etc. Except, like day 6 into it, there's a huge storm. There's a huge storm and NASA goes, get out of there. It's too strong, it's going to destroy everything, you won't get home, you'll die, blah blah blah. The rest of the crew manages to get to the rocket in time, but he is hit by debris and they can't see him, they can't find him, his intercom's broken, they just have to go. They have to go, we have to leave or all of us die. And they leave. But Mark is not dead, and Mark does not die then and there. So it's incredible watching him, especially from someone's perspective again who is not scientifically minded, watching him do insane maths, which is really reader friendly, like Weir has made it so that anyone can understand it, talk us through what he is doing to survive for however long he needs to survive, because the main problem is that they can't just turn that ship around again. They only have X amount of fuel, and then they start working on like gravitational pull and orbits. Like, it's more complicated than just being like, turn this car around, son. It's incredible. It's not a big book either, and it's a super easy read. I really liked the movie, although I didn't like some of the ways they did it. The humour of Mark's character is so much more appealing because so much of it is written down. His character comes off a million times better in the book than they could do in the film. So this is number 1 on my favourite sci-fi book of all time, for now, because it's mind-blowing, it's incredible, and I just can't believe the amount of research and thinking and creating that Weir has had to do to make this book. And there we have it. These are part of my top 10 all-time favourite sci-fi books that I really highly recommend that you get your hands on and start reading. I thoroughly enjoyed all of them, and they were just phenomenal. Yes, I have no words, they're just fantastic. This is sci-fi at its best, of what I've read. However, that's all I've got for you today, so I will be seeing you in my next video. Goodbye!